The blood on her knuckles had dried brown against skin already cracked and peeling. And when Nora Easton finally dropped the axe beside the woodpile, her entire body swayed like wheat before a storm. It was June of 1878 in Golden, Colorado, and the mountain sun beat down mercilessly on the small homestead that sat at the edge of town where civilization met wilderness. Nora had been splitting wood since dawn, her third day doing work that should have belonged to her father, but her father was 6 feet under the ground now, buried beside her mother who had passed 2 winters before. At 22 years old, Nora found herself alone on 40 acres of stubborn land with a cabin that leaked, fences that needed mending, and a mare so old she could barely pull the plow anymore. She stumbled toward the water pump, her vision blurring at the edges. Her hands screamed as she worked the handle, but she needed water more than she needed to acknowledge pain. The cold mountain water splashed over her fingers and she hissed through her teeth, watching pink rivulets run off her torn palms into the dust. That is no way to treat an injury. Nora spun around so fast, she nearly lost her balance. A man stood at the edge of her property, tall and lean with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of spring grass. He wore dusty trail clothes and a hat pushed back on his head, and his horse, a handsome bay gelding, stood ground-tied behind him. "This is private property," Nora said, hating how her voice shook with exhaustion. "I know. I am looking for the Easton place. I was told in town that Daniel Easton might have worked for a ranch hand." The man took a step closer, his eyes moving from her face to her hands and back again. Something shifted in his expression. "But I am guessing Daniel Easton is not here." "Daniel Easton is dead," Nora said flatly. "Died 3 months back. Heart gave out while he was checking the fence line, so there is no work here, stranger. You best move on." The man did not move on. Instead, he walked closer slowly like he was approaching a spooked animal. "What is your name? Why does it matter?" "Because I would like to know who I am speaking with." Nora lifted her chin. "Nora Easton, and you are trespassing. Franklin Foster. Most people call me Frank." He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could see the lines around his eyes that spoke of years squinting into the sun. He was older than her, but not by much. Maybe 28, 30 at most. "Miss Easton, when did you last eat?" The question caught her off guard. "I ate." When, she could not remember. Yesterday, the day before. Food required money or time, and she had precious little of either. "That is none of your concern, Mr. Foster." "Those hands are my concern when I see a woman working herself to death on land that is too much for 3 men to handle alone." His voice was gentle but firm. "You have been splitting wood. I can see the pile from here. Before that, looks like you were trying to mend that fence." He gestured to the eastern pasture where she had spent 2 days wrestling with posts and wire. "The barn door is hanging off its hinges. Your roof has at least 4 places where the shingles have blown off, and unless I miss my guess, you have not had a proper meal in days." Tears burned behind Nora's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "I am managing." "You are dying," Frank said quietly. "Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but you are killing yourself by inches, and for what? Pride, for my home." The words came out fierce, desperate. "This is my land. My father built this cabin with his own hands. My mother is buried on that hill. I will not lose it, I will not." Frank was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those green eyes that seemed to see too much. Then he nodded like he had made a decision. "All right then. Let me help. I told you I have no money for hired hands. Did I ask for money?" He walked past her toward the water pump. "Sit down before you fall down, Miss Easton. Let me see those hands." Nora should have told him to leave, should have sent him on his way with harsh words and her father's rifle if necessary. but her legs were shaking so badly she could barely stand, and when he pointed at the porch steps, she found herself obeying, sinking down onto the weathered wood with a sigh that came from somewhere deep in her bones. Frank pumped fresh water into the bucket, then pulled a bandana from his pocket. He wet it thoroughly before kneeling in front of her. "May I?" she nodded, not trusting her voice. His hands were careful as he took her right hand in his, turning it palm up. She heard his sharp intake of breath. "How long have your hands been like this?" "A while, Miss Easton. 3 weeks. Maybe 4." Since she had tried to fix the plow by herself, and the metal had torn through her gloves. Since she had spent 2 days hauling stones for the foundation repair. Since she had done 100 tasks that required strength and skill she did not possess, but attempted anyway, because there was no one else. Frank cleaned her hands with a gentleness that made her throat tight. The cold water stung, but his touch was so careful, so deliberate, that she found herself watching his face instead of her torn palms. He had a strong jaw, shadowed with a few days of beard growth and a small scar above his left eyebrow. His mouth was set in concentration as he worked. "I have bandages in my saddlebag," he said. "The clean kind. Do you have any salve?" "I used the last of it." He made a sound low in his throat that might have been frustration. "Stay here." He returned with his saddlebags, digging through them until he produced a small tin and strips of clean cloth. The salve smelled of herbs and something sharp she could not identify, but it cooled the burning in her palms immediately. He wrapped each hand carefully, his long fingers deft and sure. "You have done this before," she said softly. "Worked cattle drives for 8 years. You learn basic doctoring or you watch men die from infections that could have been prevented." He tied off the bandage on her left hand. "My mother was a healer. She taught me what she could before she passed." "I am sorry. It was a long time ago." He sat back on his heels, studying his handiwork. "These need to be changed tomorrow, cleaned again and fresh bandages, and you need to rest them. No more splitting wood, no more fence work, nothing until they start to heal." Nora laughed, the sound brittle and hollow. "And who will do the work then? The fairies? I am alone here, Mr. Foster. If I do not work, I lose everything." "You are not alone." He stood, offering her his hand. She stared at it, then at him. "I told you, let me help." "Why?" The question burst out of her. "You do not know me. This is not your problem. Why would you stay?" Frank was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because 6 years ago my father died and left my mother and sister on a homestead in Kansas. I was working a cattle drive and could not get back in time. By the time I made it home, my mother had worked herself sick trying to keep the place running. She died that winter. My sister was 16 years old and alone." His jaw tightened. "A neighbor family took her in, but we lost the land. Everything my father built, gone because I was not there when they needed me." Understanding dawned. "I am not your sister." "No, but someone's sister is always in trouble somewhere, and I have spent 6 years wishing I could go back and change things. I cannot, but I can be here now." He met her eyes. "So let me help you, Miss Easton. No pay, no expectations. Just let me make sure you do not work yourself to death on this land." Nora wanted to say no, wanted to cling to her independence, her pride, all the things that had kept her moving through these terrible months. But her hands throbbed beneath the bandages, and she was so tired she could barely think, and this stranger with sad green eyes was offering her something she had not had in so long: hope. "The barn," she heard herself say. "There is space in the barn. It is not much, but it is dry and there is hay for bedding." Something eased in Frank's expression. "The barn is fine, but first you need food. When did you say you last ate?" "I did not say." "That is what I thought." He helped her to her feet. "Come on. Let us see what you have inside, and I will make us both something hot." The cabin was small, just 2 rooms, but her mother had made it a home once. Now it felt hollow and sad, dust gathering in corners Nora was too exhausted to sweep. Frank looked around with a practiced eye, taking in the near-empty pantry, the cold stove, the dishes piled in the basin. "You have dried beans," he said, examining the few supplies she had left. "Some flour, salt, a little coffee. There is a creek on the property, past the eastern pasture. It runs year-round. Good. I will set snares tomorrow, see if I can catch some rabbit or turkey. For tonight, beans and cornbread will do." He started moving around her kitchen like he belonged there, building up the fire in the stove, setting a pot of water to boil. "You sit. Rest those hands." Nora sat at the rough-hewn table her father had made, watching this stranger cook in her kitchen. It felt surreal, like a dream she might wake from at any moment. But the ache in her hands was real, and the smell of food cooking was real. And when Frank finally set a bowl of hot beans and a piece of cornbread in front of her, her stomach growled so loudly they both heard it. "Eat slow," he cautioned, sitting across from her with his own bowl. "Your stomach will not be used to it." She tried to follow his advice, but the food was hot and filling, and she could not remember the last time something had tasted so good. She ate until her bowl was empty, then sat back feeling more human than she had in weeks. "Thank you," she said quietly. Frank nodded. "Tomorrow I will start on the barn door, then move to the roof. After that, we need to assess the fence situation and figure out what else needs immediate attention." He paused. "I saw the mare in the pasture. She is pretty old. 23 this year. She was my mother's horse." Nora looked down at her bandaged hands. "I know I need to replace her, but I cannot afford another horse, and I cannot bring myself to put her down. She has been with us since I was a child. We will figure it out." He stood, collecting their bowls. "For now, you need sleep. Real sleep in a bed for as long as your body needs. I will handle the morning chores, Mr. Foster." "Frank," he corrected gently. "If I am going to be staying on your land, I think we can manage first names." Frank. His name felt strange in her mouth, intimate somehow. "I do not know how to repay you for this." "Rest now," he said, and his voice was so kind it nearly broke her. "That is all the payment I need. Rest and let yourself heal." After he left for the barn, Nora sat alone in the quiet cabin. The dishes were washed, the fire banked, and her hands ached less now beneath their careful bandages. She touched them gingerly, remembering the gentleness in Frank's calloused fingers, the way he had cleaned each wound like it mattered. She did not know this man. Did not know if she could trust him. But as she finally climbed into her narrow bed and pulled her mother's quilt up to her chin, she felt something she had not felt since her father died. She felt less alone. Sleep took her quickly, deep and dreamless, and for the first time in months she did not wake before dawn. The sun was well up when Nora finally opened her eyes. For a moment, panic gripped her. The morning chores, the animals, the 100 tasks that needed doing. But then she remembered. Frank. She dressed quickly, wincing as her bandaged hands protested, and stepped outside into a morning already warm with summer promise. The sound of hammering drew her toward the barn, and she stopped in her tracks at what she saw. The barn door had been rehung, sitting straight and true on its hinges. The water trough had been scrubbed clean and filled. Fresh hay had been scattered in the mare's stall, and the old horse stood munching contentedly, looking more comfortable than she had in weeks. And on the barn roof, balanced with easy confidence, Frank worked at replacing the missing shingles he must have found in her father's supply shed. He had already done half a day's work, and the morning was barely half gone. "You should still be resting," he called down when he spotted her. "I have rested enough." "Not nearly." He climbed down the ladder with the ease of long practice. "How do the hands feel?" "Better." It was true. The throbbing had dulled to a manageable ache. "You have been busy. Just making a start." He wiped sweat from his forehead. "Your mare needed attention. I gave her some grain from the sack in the barn. Hope that was all right." "I have been rationing it," Nora admitted. "I cannot afford more until I can get to town with something to sell, but I have nothing ready yet." Frank studied her for a moment. "What about eggs?" "I saw you have chickens. 6 hens, but they are not laying much in this heat, because they need better shelter. That coop is falling apart." He gestured to the sad structure listing to one side near the cabin. "I will reinforce it this afternoon, make sure they have proper shade and ventilation. Happy chickens lay more eggs, and eggs we can sell or trade in town." "You have thought this all through." "I have run a homestead before," he said simply. "I know what needs doing." "But Nora, I need you to be honest with me. What is your situation here? Do you owe money, back taxes? What are we working against?" She appreciated his directness. "My father had been paying down the land for 8 years. There are 2 years left on the note, with payments due every 6 months. The next one is due in 3 months. I also owe at the general store in town, though Mr. Peterson has been patient, and there are county taxes due in September." "How much total?" She named the figures, watching his face. He did not flinch, but she saw him calculating. "That is a lot." "I know. My father had a plan. He was going to buy more cattle this spring, breed them, sell the calves in the fall. But then he died, and I do not have money for cattle, and even if I did, I could not manage them alone." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I have been selling what I could. Eggs when the chickens cooperate, vegetables from the garden, but it has not been enough. I thought maybe I could take in laundry or hire out for cooking, but the work here takes all my time and I am falling further behind every day." Frank was quiet, his green eyes distant with thought. Then he said, "My horse is a good stud. Strong lines, good temperament. We could offer breeding services. There are plenty of ranchers around here who might pay for quality bloodlines. It will not be much, but it is something." "You would do that? I am already here, am I not?" He smiled, just a small quirk of his mouth, but it transformed his serious face. "Besides, Thunder needs to feel useful. He gets sulky when he is idle too long." Despite everything, Nora found herself smiling back. "You named your horse Thunder?" "I was 18 and thought it sounded impressive." His smile widened. "In my defense, he does have an impressive stride." It was such a normal, human moment that something tight in Nora's chest loosened. "Thank you, Frank, for all of this. Thank me when we have saved your homestead." He turned back toward the barn. "Now, did you eat breakfast?" She had not, and he knew it by her expression. He shook his head. "Go back inside. There should be cornbread left from last night, and I brought up fresh water. Eat something while I finish the roof, then I will work on that chicken coop." Nora wanted to argue, wanted to prove she could manage, but her body was still crying out for rest. So she nodded and returned to the cabin, eating slowly while she watched through the window as Frank worked under the hot sun. He moved with the easy efficiency of someone who had spent his whole life doing hard labor. No wasted motion, no complaints, just steady, patient work. She found herself wondering about him, about the life he had lived before showing up at her homestead. He had mentioned his mother and sister, a ranch in Kansas. What had brought him to Colorado? Why had he been looking for work at her father's place specifically? The questions nagged at her as the day wore on. She changed the water for the animals, ignoring Frank's protest that she should be resting. She tended her struggling garden, pulling weeds with her bandaged hands and trying not to think about how thin everything looked. She swept the cabin and tried to make order out of the chaos her life had become. By evening, Frank had finished the roof, reinforced the chicken coop, and set 3 snares near the creek. He had also somehow found time to sharpen her axe, oil the squeaking gate, and repair a weak board in the porch steps she had been meaning to fix for months. "You do not have to do everything in one day," Nora said as they sat on the porch steps after a supper of more beans and the last of the cornbread. "I know. But I also know how it feels to watch everything fall apart faster than you can fix it. Better to get ahead while we can." He stretched his long legs out, rolling his shoulders. "Tomorrow I want to ride into town, talk to some people, see about getting you extended credit at the general store and maybe finding some work for Thunder as a stud. That all right with you? You do not need my permission." "This is your land, Nora. I do need your permission." The way he said her name with that quiet respect made her heart do something strange in her chest. She was not used to being spoken to like an equal. Most men in town looked at her with pity or speculation, wondering when she would give up and sell out. Frank looked at her like she was a person who deserved consideration. "Then yes," she said, "you have my permission, but Frank, people in town are going to ask questions. About who you are, why you are here. Let them ask." "And what will you tell them?" He turned to look at her, the setting sun turning his eyes to gold. "The truth. That I am a ranch hand working for room and board while you recover from an injury. Nothing scandalous about that." She supposed there was not, though she knew the gossips would make something of it anyway. A young, unmarried woman alone with a strange man, even one sleeping in the barn. It would give the church ladies something to cluck about over their sewing circles. "I do not care what they think," she found herself saying. "Let them talk." Frank's smile was approving. "Good, neither do I." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dropped behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The air cooled, bringing the sweet smell of pine and wild grass. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, lonely and wild. "It is beautiful here," Frank said quietly. "I can see why you are fighting so hard to keep it. My father loved this land. He used to say it was hard country but honest country, that if you worked with it instead of against it, it would provide." She swallowed hard. He was a good man, he deserved more time. Most good people do. Frank stood, offering her his hand. "Come on. You need to let me check those bandages before we turn in." Inside, with the lamp lit and the evening shadows gathering, Frank unwrapped her hands carefully. The wounds looked better already, less angry and raw. He cleaned them again with steady, gentle movements, then applied fresh salve and clean bandages. "You have a healer's hands," Nora said without thinking. "My mother used to say that. She wanted me to study proper medicine, but we did not have money for that kind of schooling." He tied off the last bandage. "Maybe in another life I would have been a doctor. In this one, I am just a cowboy who knows basic first aid. There is nothing just about what you are doing here." She flexed her fingers experimentally. "These feel so much better. By tomorrow I will be able to help properly." "Tomorrow you will continue to rest those hands while they heal," Frank said firmly. "Doctor's orders." "I thought you said you were not a doctor." "Close enough." His eyes were warm with humor. "Do not make me tie you to a chair, Miss Easton." "I would like to see you try, Mr. Foster." They looked at each other for a moment, and something shifted in the air between them, something warm and unexpected that made Nora's breath catch. Then Frank stepped back, clearing his throat. "I should let you get some sleep. Long day tomorrow." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Nora, lock this door after I leave, and there is a rifle by the door. I cleaned it earlier. It is loaded. You think I will need it?" "I think a woman alone should always be prepared." His face was serious. "I will be in the barn if you need anything." "Anything at all?" After he left, Nora locked the door and checked the rifle. Sure enough, it was clean and loaded, ready if she needed it. The gesture touched her more than it probably should have. Frank was looking out for her, protecting her, and she was not entirely sure what to do with that. She lay in bed that night, listening to the familiar sounds of the homestead settling around her. But something was different now. She was not alone in the darkness. Out in the barn, Frank was sleeping, watching over her land and her animals, and somehow it should have felt strange. Instead, it felt right. Morning brought the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Nora woke to it, confused for a moment before memory returned. She dressed quickly and found Frank cooking at her stove like he had done it 100 times before. "Where did you get bacon?" she asked. "Rode into town early. Traded some work for the general store owner. Moved some heavy inventory for him in exchange for basic supplies." He flipped the bacon expertly. "Figured we both needed a proper breakfast before the day starts. Frank, you cannot keep spending your time and money on me. My time is my own to spend how I want, and the bacon cost me an hour's work, not money." He plated food for both of them. "Now sit down and eat. Then I need to ride into town properly, talk to some folks, unless you need me here." Nora shook her head. She did need to work on her garden, and there was mending that needed doing, tasks she could manage with her healing hands. "I will be fine, but be careful. Some of the people in town are not very friendly to outsiders. I have dealt with unfriendly before." He sat across from her. "Anyone in particular I should watch out for?" She thought about the men who had been sniffing around her property since her father died. "There is a man named Cyrus Holt. He owns the big spread north of here. He has made several offers to buy me out, and he was not happy when I refused. His son, Dalton, is even worse. He seems to think I should be grateful for their interest." Frank's jaw tightened. "I will keep an eye out. If either of them bothers you, you let me know. I can handle them." "I am sure you can, but you should not have to." He held her gaze. "You have been handling everything alone for too long, Nora. Let someone stand with you for a change." The words settled into her chest, warm and solid. She nodded, not trusting her voice. After breakfast, Frank saddled Thunder and headed toward town. Nora watched him go, then turned to her garden with renewed determination. Her hands protested the work, but the fresh bandages helped, and she managed to get the weeds cleared and the plants watered from the creek. She was hanging laundry when she heard the horse approaching. But it was not Thunder's steady hoofbeats. This horse moved faster with less care. She straightened, shading her eyes against the noon sun, and her stomach sank when she recognized the rider. Dalton Holt sat astride a flashy palomino, his expensive hat and tooled leather saddle announcing his wealth. He was 24, handsome in a cold way, with pale blue eyes and wheat-colored hair. He had been trying to court Nora since before her father died, and he did not handle rejection well. "Miss Easton," he called out, not bothering to dismount. "I heard interesting news in town this morning." "Mr. Holt." Nora kept her voice neutral. "What brings you out here?" "I heard you have hired a ranch hand, some drifter asking questions about your property." He looked around with obvious disdain. "Seems like poor judgment bringing a strange man onto your land. People are talking. Let them talk. My father still wants to buy your land, Nora. His offer is more than generous. You could move into town, live comfortably. You would not have to work yourself to the bone trying to keep this place running." His eyes moved over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "And you would not have to resort to keeping company with drifters just to get by." Anger flared hot in her chest. "Frank is a good man working for honest pay. What people make of that is their own small-minded business. Now, if you will excuse me, I have work to do." "You always were stubborn." Dalton finally dismounted, walking toward her with false casualness. "But stubbornness only gets you so far. This land is too much for you. Everyone knows it. Sell to my father, Nora, before you lose everything. The land is not for sale." He was close now, too close. Nora held her ground even as every instinct screamed at her to back away. Everything is for sale at the right price. The question is what you are willing to trade for it. His meaning was clear and insulting. Nora felt her face flame. Get off my property. Or what? You will have your drifter throw me off, he laughed. I could buy and sell 10 men like him. You would do better to reconsider my interest, Nora. I could make things very easy for you, very comfortable. I said get off my property. She turned toward the cabin where the rifle waited, but Dalton grabbed her arm. Pain shot through her injured hand and she gasped. Let me see those hands. He pulled at the bandages roughly. Heard you had hurt yourself. This is exactly what I am talking about. You are not built for this kind of work. A woman like you needs someone to take care of her. Let her go. The voice was quiet but deadly. Dalton dropped her arm and spun around. Frank sat on Thunder at the edge of the property, and though his posture was relaxed, something in his stillness spoke of coiled danger. And who exactly are you? Dalton demanded. Frank Foster. I work for Miss Easton. He rode closer, and Nora noticed he had positioned himself between her and Dalton. She told you to leave. I suggest you listen. This is none of your concern, Drifter. Everything that happens on this property is my concern. Frank dismounted in one smooth motion. He was not as flashy as Dalton, not as wealthy or polished, but he carried himself with a quiet confidence that made the younger man hesitate. Now you can leave peaceful, or I can help you leave. Your choice. Dalton looked between them, his face flushing with anger and something like embarrassment. This is not over, Easton. My father will hear about this, about all of it. He turned back to Frank. And you, Drifter, you best watch yourself. Strangers do not last long around here when they make the wrong enemies. I will take my chances. Frank did not move, did not even raise his voice. He just stood there, immovable as a mountain, and after a tense moment, Dalton mounted his fancy horse and rode off at a gallop. Only when the hoofbeats had faded did Frank turn to Nora. Are you all right? Did he hurt you? My hand. She flexed her fingers carefully. He grabbed it, but I think it is fine. Let me see. Frank led her to the porch steps and unwrapped the bandage Dalton had pulled loose. The wounds had opened slightly, one of them bleeding again. His jaw tightened. That fool. It is not bad. It is not good either. He cleaned the wound gently, his touch feather light. That is the man you warned me about, his son. But yes. Nora watched him work, grateful for his steadiness. They have wanted this land for years. The creek runs through here before it reaches their property. Water rights are valuable in this country. So they have been waiting for you to fail. Essentially. Though Dalton seems to think I should be flattered by his interest. She shuddered slightly. He has always looked at me like I am something he can buy. Frank's hand stilled on hers. When he looked up, his green eyes were fierce. No one is going to buy you or your land, not while I am here. You cannot fight the Holts. They own half the county. I do not have to fight them. I just have to make sure they know that bothering you comes with consequences. He finished retying her bandage. But I think from now on, we are going to need to be more careful. If they are watching, if they are waiting for you to fail, we cannot give them any ammunition. What do you mean? I mean I should probably not stay in the barn anymore. At her startled look, he held up his hands. I am not suggesting anything improper, but maybe we need to make this arrangement more official. If I am going to work this land properly, I should file papers in town. Register myself as an official employee, properly contracted. That way there is a legal record, nothing they can twist into scandal. It made sense, even if the idea of tangling with more legal paperwork made Nora's head hurt. If you think that is best, I do, and Nora. He waited until she met his eyes. If Dalton or his father show up here again when I am gone, you do not engage. You get inside, you lock the door, and if they do not leave, you use that rifle. Understand? I have known them my whole life, Frank. They are not going to hurt me. A man who grabs a woman's injured hand is capable of more than you think. His voice was hard. Promise me, you will not take chances with them. The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. I promise. Good. He stood, offering her his hand. Now I need to tell you what I learned in town. I spoke with the banker and the general store owner, and I have some ideas about how we can start generating income. But first, I need to check those snares. Want to come with me? Nora did want to, she realized. She wanted to walk with this man through her property, wanted to hear his ideas, wanted to not be alone for just a little while longer. Yes, let me grab my hat. They walked toward the creek together, the afternoon sun warm on their shoulders. Frank moved with the easy grace of someone completely comfortable in the wilderness, pointing out tracks and signs that Nora had never learned to read. There, he said quietly, kneeling beside the first snare. A fat rabbit hung in the wire, freshly caught. That is tonight's supper. He checked the other snares, finding 2 more rabbits and resetting the traps. This creek is a good resource. We can set up more snares, maybe even try fishing. Trout like this cold mountain water. I never learned to fish. Then I will teach you, he smiled at her surprise. What? You thought I would just do everything while you watched. No, you need to learn these skills. This is your land, Nora. You should know how to use all of it. They walked along the creek for a while, Frank pointing out useful plants and good spots for fishing. He talked about his ideas for the property. A better chicken coop that could house more hens, increasing egg production. Repairs to the barn so they could potentially take in livestock for boarding. Using his horse for breeding services, splitting the profits. It will not be fast money, he admitted as they headed back toward the cabin, but it will be steady. Combined with what you can make from your garden and maybe some preserves if we can get fruit, it should be enough to start making your payments. You make it sound possible. It is possible. Difficult but possible. You have good land here, Nora. It just needs work and time. Time. That was the one thing she was not sure she had enough of. But with Frank here, with his steady presence and endless competence, it almost seemed like they might make it work. That evening, Frank showed her how to skin and clean the rabbits, patient with her squeamishness and careful of her bandaged hands. They roasted the meat over the fire along with vegetables from her garden, and Nora could not remember the last time she had eaten so well. Tomorrow I am going to start repairing the fence line, Frank said as they ate. That eastern pasture cannot hold anything until it is properly secured. It will take a few days, but once it is done, we could potentially lease it out for grazing. There are smaller ranchers who need space for their herds but cannot afford their own land. You have thought of everything. I have had experience with struggling homesteads. He poked at the fire. My father spent his whole life trying to make our place work. I learned a lot watching him, both what to do and what not to do. The key is diversification. You cannot put all your hopes on one thing. You need multiple income streams so if one fails, you have others to fall back on. That is why my father wanted cattle. He thought if he could build a herd, we would have steady income from selling calves every year. It is a good plan if you have the capital to start and the ability to manage a herd. Right now, we have neither, so we start smaller. Chickens, rabbits, fish, garden produce. Once we build up some savings, we can talk about expanding. Nora studied him in the firelight. You keep saying we like you plan to stay. Frank was quiet for a moment, then he said, Do you want me to leave? No. The word came out too fast, too honest. No, I do not want you to leave. But Frank, you cannot plan your whole life around my problems. You said you were looking for work when you came here. Surely you have plans, places you need to be. I was drifting, he said simply. Going from job to job, never staying anywhere long. After my mother and sister, I could not stand the thought of settling down. Felt like if I kept moving, I could outrun the guilt. He looked at her directly. But I am tired of running, Nora. And this place, this work, it feels right. Like maybe I can do some good here. You have already done more good than you know. Then let me keep doing it. Let me stay at least until we get your homestead stable. After that, if you want me gone, I will go. But give me a chance to finish what I started. How could she say no to that? She nodded, her throat tight. Stay. Please stay. The smile he gave her was worth every ounce of pride she had swallowed to ask. The days fell into a rhythm after that. Frank worked on the fence line while Nora tended the garden and the chickens, her hands healing slowly under his careful attention. They ate meals together, talking about the work and the land and, gradually, about their lives. Nora learned that Frank was 30 years old, that he had been born in Missouri and moved to Kansas when he was 10. That his father had been a farmer who dreamed of ranching, and his mother had been the daughter of a Cherokee healer who had taught her everything she knew before dying in the forced removals. That Frank's sister, Mary, was married now to a blacksmith in Kansas City, and they had 2 children Frank had never met. "Why do you not visit?" Nora asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Guilt," Frank said simply. "I let them lose the homestead. I was not there when they needed me. Mary says she does not blame me, but I blame myself. It feels wrong to show up now and play the happy uncle when I failed them so badly before." "You did not fail them. You were working, providing for your family the only way you knew how. I know that here." He tapped his head, "But not here." His hand moved to his chest. Some guilt does not listen to logic. Nora understood that better than she could say. "I feel guilty too. About my father. I should have made him rest more, should have seen the signs that his heart was failing. Maybe if I had paid closer attention, gotten him to a doctor. And maybe nothing would have changed," Frank said gently. "You cannot carry blame for things beyond your control, Nora. Your father's heart failed because hearts fail sometimes. It was not your fault any more than my mother working herself sick was mine." He paused. "Though I know telling you that does not make it hurt less." "No," she agreed softly. "It does not." They sat in companionable silence, watching the sky turn from gold to purple to deep blue. Somewhere nearby, an owl called. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke and the promise of another hot day tomorrow. "Thank you," Nora said quietly, "for understanding, for being here, for everything." Frank turned to look at her, and in the fading light his eyes were very green. "There is nowhere else I would rather be." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither of them was quite ready to examine. Then Frank cleared his throat and stood. "I should check on Thunder. Get some rest, all right. Tomorrow I want to start on the chicken coop expansion." After he left, Nora sat alone in the gathering darkness, her heart beating a little too fast. Something was growing between them, something more than simple friendship or working partnership. She could feel it in the way Frank looked at her, in the careful way he tended her hands, in the small considerations he showed her every day. And the terrifying thing was, she felt it too. This pull toward him, this want. It had been so long since she had let herself want anything beyond simple survival. But Frank made her remember what it felt like to be a woman, not just a struggling homesteader. He made her feel seen and valued and cared for in ways she had almost forgotten were possible. It was dangerous, she knew, to depend on him, to care for him, to let him become necessary to her existence. He had said he would stay until the homestead was stable, but what then? Would he drift away again, back to his wandering life? And where would that leave her? But even knowing the danger, she could not seem to protect her heart. It was opening to him despite her best efforts, unfurling like the flowers in her garden toward the sun. 2 weeks passed. The fence was repaired, solid and true. The expanded chicken coop housed 12 hens now, purchased with money Frank had earned doing odd jobs in town. The eggs they produced went to the general store, and Mr. Peterson paid cash money for them, the first real income Nora had seen in months. Frank taught her to fish, patient as she fumbled with the line. They caught enough trout to smoke and preserve, adding to their winter stores. He taught her to read tracks, to identify useful plants, to set snares properly. He taught her ranch work the way his father had taught him, with patience and repetition until her hands remembered the movements. Her hands healed. The raw wounds closed over, leaving behind pink scars that Frank said would fade with time. She could work again without pain, though he still watched her carefully, making sure she did not overdo it. "You hover," she told him one afternoon as they worked together in the garden. "I am concerned. I am not going to break. I know that." He sat back on his heels, pushing his hat back to look at her properly. "But just because you can do everything alone does not mean you should have to. Let me help, Nora. It does not make you weak." She knew he was right, knew that her pride had nearly destroyed her before he arrived. But it was hard to let go of old habits, hard to accept that needing help did not mean failure. "I am trying," she said finally. "It is just difficult. I know." His smile was understanding. "But you are doing well, better than you think." That evening they had visitors. The sound of horses drew them both outside, and Nora's stomach clenched when she recognized Cyrus Holt and two of his ranch hands. Dalton rode beside his father, looking smug. Frank moved to stand slightly in front of Nora, his posture casual but ready. "Mr. Holt, what brings you out here?" Cyrus Holt was a big man in his 50s, with iron-gray hair and cold blue eyes like his son. He surveyed the property with obvious calculation, taking in the repairs, the expanded chicken coop, the signs of careful maintenance. "I came to speak with Miss Easton," Cyrus said. "In private." "Anything you need to say, you can say in front of Frank," Nora replied, grateful her voice stayed steady. Cyrus's mouth tightened. "Very well. I will be direct. I know your payment is due in 2 months. I also know you do not have the money. I am prepared to offer you $1,500 for your land and assets. That is more than fair, and it will clear your debts with enough left over for you to start fresh somewhere else. The land is not for sale." "Miss Easton, be reasonable. You cannot possibly make that payment. You have no livestock, minimal crops, and you are relying on hired help you cannot afford." His eyes flicked to Frank dismissively. "This is charity you are living on, and charity does not pay bank notes." "I will make the payment," Nora said, lifting her chin. "How?" Dalton spoke up, his voice mocking. "Selling eggs. You would need 1,000 chickens to make enough from eggs alone." "We are diversifying our income," Frank said calmly. "Eggs produce, livestock boarding, breeding services. Miss Easton will make her payment." Cyrus laughed, the sound harsh. "Son, I appreciate optimism, but I have been ranching in this territory for 25 years. I know what it takes to make land pay, and this homestead does not have it. Easton here is a dreamer who got himself killed trying to prove otherwise. I will not stand by and watch his daughter destroy herself the same way." "How generous of you," Nora said sharply. "But I notice your concern conveniently benefits you. That creek on my land is what you really want, is it not? More water for your herds." "That creek benefits the whole region," Cyrus replied. "Water is a resource that should not be wasted on a failing homestead." "It is not a failing homestead," Frank cut in. "It is a working ranch that has faced hard times. Miss Easton has every right to keep her land, and with respect, she does not need your permission or approval to do so." "And who exactly are you, Foster?" Cyrus leaned forward in his saddle. "I have been asking around about you. Seems you are a drifter with no property. No prospects and a dead mother and sister you could not protect. What makes you think you can protect anything here? Frank went very still. Nora felt fury rise hot in her chest at the cruel words, but before she could speak, Frank said quietly, "What happened to my family is my burden to carry. But I am here now and I am not leaving. So whatever plans you have for this property, you can forget them." Is that a threat? It is a fact. Now I think you have said your piece. Time for you to leave. Cyrus looked between them, his face darkening. You are making a mistake, Miss Easton, both of you, but I cannot help people who will not see reason. He turned his horse. The offer stands for 1 more week. After that, I will be much less generous. They rode off in a cloud of dust. Nora watched them go, her hands clenched into fists. How dare he bring up your family like that? He was trying to get a rise out of me. Frank's voice was carefully neutral. Men like that always look for weak spots to prod. It was cruel and unnecessary. Yes, it was. He turned to her and she saw the hurt beneath his calm exterior. But he is not entirely wrong. I could not protect them. That is not fair and you know it. You did everything you could. Did I? The question was raw. Sometimes I wonder, if I had come home sooner, if I had been there, maybe things would have been different. Nora grabbed his arm, making him look at her. You cannot change the past, Frank. None of us can. But you are here now, doing good work, helping me save my home. That matters. You matter. He looked at her for a long moment, something complicated moving behind his eyes. Then he said, "Thank you. I needed to hear that." They stood close together in the fading light, and Nora was suddenly very aware of his warmth, his solidity, the way his eyes held hers like she was the only thing in the world worth looking at. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Frank lifted his hand slowly, carefully, and brushed a strand of hair back from her face. His fingers lingered against her cheek, calloused and gentle. "Nora," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. She swayed toward him, drawn by something stronger than logic or caution. But then a coyote howled somewhere in the hills, breaking the moment, and Frank dropped his hand and stepped back. "I should see to the animals," he said, his voice rough. "It is getting late." He walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing alone in the twilight with her heart racing and her thoughts in chaos. Something had almost happened between them, something significant, and the fact that he had pulled away left her feeling strangely bereft. That night, Nora lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and trying to sort through her feelings. She cared for Frank, that much was clear. But was it just gratitude, relief at not being alone, or was it something deeper, something that could be called love? And did it matter, when he had made no promises to stay beyond getting her homestead stable? When at any moment he might decide to drift away again, back to his wandering life. She must have finally slept, because she woke to the sound of breaking glass and a horse screaming. Nora was out of bed and grabbing the rifle before conscious thought caught up with panic. She ran outside in her nightgown to find flames licking at the barn. "Frank!" Her scream tore through the night. The barn door burst open and Frank led Thunder out, the horse wild-eyed and panicking. Behind them, the fire was spreading fast, too fast to be natural. "Someone set this," Frank said grimly, fighting to control Thunder. "I heard them ride off just before it caught." Nora was already running for the water pump. They worked together frantically, hauling bucket after bucket, but the fire had too much of a head start. By the time they got it under control, half the barn was destroyed. They stood in the smoking ruins as dawn broke gray and cold. Thunder had calmed enough to be tied near the cabin, but Frank's supplies were gone. His bedroll, his clothes, everything he owned had burned. "The Holts," Nora said through gritted teeth. "It had to be them. We cannot prove it." "Who else would do this?" Frank did not answer. He was staring at the damage with an expression that made Nora's heart hurt. This was her fault. Her land, her problems, had cost him everything he owned. "I am so sorry," she whispered. He turned to her, and his face was grim but not angry. "You have nothing to apologize for. This is not your fault." "But, no," he gripped her shoulders gently. "This is the fault of whoever set that fire, and we will deal with them. But right now, we need to figure out what to do. I cannot sleep in the barn anymore, not until we rebuild. And we need to report this to the sheriff, get it on record even if nothing comes of it." "You can sleep in the cabin," Nora said immediately. "I have the second room. It is not much, just a small space my father used for storage, but it has a bed." Frank hesitated. "Nora, people in town already talk. If I move into your cabin, let them talk. I do not care anymore." She was surprised to find she meant it. "You could have died in that fire, Frank. Someone is trying to drive us off this land, and I will not make it easier for them by worrying about propriety." "Your reputation." "My reputation is already ruined by the simple fact of being a struggling spinster on a failing homestead. At least this way you will be safe and comfortable." She met his eyes. "Please, let me do this one thing for you after everything you have done for me." He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but I am buying a lock for that bedroom door when we go into town. I will not have people thinking I am taking advantage, as if you would. As if anyone would believe I would not." His smile was tired but genuine. "Come on. Let us get some coffee in us and figure out our next move." They rode into town together after securing what was left of the barn. The sheriff listened to their story with a skeptical expression, writing down notes that Nora suspected would never be looked at again. "You are sure it was not just an accident?" Sheriff Morrison asked. "Lantern knocked over dry hay." "I am sure," Frank said flatly. "The fire started in 3 separate places simultaneously. That does not happen by accident." "And you are saying the Holts did this?" "I am saying someone wants Miss Easton to fail badly enough to commit arson. The Holts have been pressuring her to sell. You draw your own conclusions." Morrison sighed. "Look, I will ride out to the Holt place, ask some questions, but without proof, there is not much I can do. And starting accusations against the richest family in the county is not something to be done lightly." "So they can do whatever they want because they have money?" Nora demanded. "I did not say that. I said I need proof." Morrison closed his notebook. "I will investigate Miss Easton. That is all I can promise." Outside the sheriff's office, Nora wanted to scream her frustration. "He is not going to do anything." "Probably not," Frank agreed. "Which means we need to be more careful, and we need to rebuild that barn fast. I have been thinking. We could use it as an opportunity to build it better, stronger. Something that could house more animals, maybe even take in horses for boarding like we talked about. With what money? I have some saved. Not much, but enough for materials. And I can do the work myself if you help." He looked at the general store across the street. "Let me talk to Peterson, see if he will extend credit for supplies. Between your egg money and what I can earn doing odd jobs, we should be able to manage." Nora followed him into the store, grateful for his steady presence. Mr. Peterson was sympathetic when he heard about the fire, and after some negotiation, he agreed to sell them lumber and supplies on credit to be paid back over the next 6 months. "I know you are good for it," he told Nora kindly. "Your father was an honest man, and from what I have seen, you are just like him. And Foster here has been nothing but reliable. I trust you will make good." It was more trust than they probably deserved, but Nora accepted it gratefully. They loaded the wagon with lumber and headed back to the homestead, both of them scanning the horizon constantly for any sign of trouble. Over the next 2 weeks, they rebuilt the barn. Frank worked from dawn to dusk, and Nora worked beside him, handing him tools and holding boards steady while he nailed them in place. It was hard, exhausting work, but there was something satisfying about watching the structure rise from the ashes. Frank had moved into the small room in the cabin, and though Nora had been nervous about the arrangement at first, it quickly became natural. They fell into an easy domestic routine. She cooked breakfast while he did the morning chores. They worked together during the day, then took turns cooking supper. In the evenings, they sat on the porch or inside by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. Nora learned more about him in those weeks than she had in all the time before. He told her about his childhood in Missouri, about learning to ride before he could walk, about his mother's healing work and the prejudice she faced for her Cherokee heritage. He told her about his father's dreams and failures, about watching the man work himself into an early grave trying to prove he could succeed. "I swore I would not end up like him," Frank said one evening as they sat by the fire. "Swore I would not tie myself to land that would break me. And yet here I am, building a barn and planning for the future like I have roots. Is that a bad thing? I do not know yet." He poked at the fire with a stick. "Part of me is terrified I will fail again, that I will let you down like I let my family down. You did not let them down, Frank. And you will not let me down. I trust you." He looked at her, and the emotion in his eyes made her breath catch. "I do not know what I did to deserve that trust, but I will not take it lightly. You earned it. Every day you stay, every bit of work you do, you earn it." Frank set down the stick and shifted closer to her on the hearth. "Nora, I need to tell you something. I need you to understand why I am really here. You told me. You wanted to help. That is true, but it is not the whole truth." He took a breath. "When I rode up to your property that first day and saw you, exhausted and hurt and still fighting, something in me recognized something in you. You reminded me of my mother, yes, but it was more than that. It was like looking at myself. Someone carrying more than they could bear but refusing to quit. Someone who needed help but would never ask for it." He reached out and took her hand gently. "I stayed because I wanted to help, but I stayed because of you, Nora, because from that first moment you mattered to me. And every day since, you have come to matter more." Nora's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Frank, I am not asking for anything," he continued quickly. "I know this is not the time or place. I know you have enough to worry about without me complicating things. But I needed you to know. Whatever happens with the homestead, whether we succeed or fail, I am here because I want to be, because I care about you, because somewhere along the way I fell in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, huge and terrifying and wonderful. Nora stared at him, at this strong, kind man who had shown up out of nowhere and changed her entire world. And she realized that what she felt for him was not gratitude or relief or simple companionship. It was love. "I love you too," she whispered, and watched his eyes go wide with surprise and hope. "I think I have been falling in love with you since you wrapped my hands and told me to rest. Maybe even before that, when you looked at my broken-down homestead and saw possibility instead of failure." Frank's smile was like sunrise. "Can I kiss you?" "Yes," she breathed. "Please." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but she did not want to. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted the future he represented. When his lips met hers, gentle and sure, it felt like coming home. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, learning. Then Nora's hands came up to his shoulders and Frank's arms went around her waist, and the kiss deepened into something that stole the breath from her lungs. He tasted like coffee and wood smoke and something uniquely him. His mouth was warm and searching. Asking questions she answered with her lips and her hands, and the soft sound she made when he pulled her closer. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. Frank rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. I have wanted to do that for weeks, he admitted. I have wanted you to. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. We are going to make this work, Nora. The homestead, us, all of it. I promise you. She believed him. For the first time since her father died, she believed things might actually work out. The next morning brought rain, the first real rain in weeks. It soaked into the thirsty earth and filled the water barrels and made the garden sing with growth. Frank and Nora stood on the porch watching it come down, his arm around her shoulders, and she felt something settle in her chest. Peace. She felt peace. We should get married, Frank said suddenly. Nora looked up at him, startled. What? Marry me? He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. I know this is fast. I know we have only known each other a little over a month. But I love you, Nora, and I want to build a life with you. Not as your hired hand, but as your husband, your partner in every way. Frank. I am not trying to take over your homestead or control your life. I want to share it with you. Work this land together, build something that lasts. His green eyes were earnest, almost desperate. I know I do not have much to offer. I have no property, no wealth, just my skills and my back and my promise that I will never stop fighting for you and this life we are building. But if that is enough, if I am enough, then say yes. Nora felt tears spill down her cheeks. You are enough. You are more than enough. Yes, Frank. I will marry you. His whoop of joy echoed across the property as he swept her up and spun her around in the rain. She laughed, giddy and breathless, her hands on his shoulders and her heart so full she thought it might burst. When he set her down, he kissed her again, and this kiss was different. This kiss was a promise, a beginning, a claiming. This kiss said mine and yours and ours. They were married 3 days later by the circuit preacher who rode through Golden once a month. Nora wore her mother's best dress, carefully mended and pressed. Frank wore new trousers and a clean shirt purchased with some of his savings. They stood in the small church with Mr. Peterson and his wife as witnesses, and pledged their lives to each other in front of God and the law. When the preacher said Frank could kiss his bride, he did so with a gentleness that made Nora's heart ache. His hand cradled her face like she was something precious, and when he whispered, I love you, Mrs. Foster, she thought she might die of happiness. The banker, when they visited to update the land records, was surprised but professional. This means Mr. Foster will be taking over the payments on the property. No, Nora said firmly. We will be making the payments together. The land remains in my name, but Frank has full partnership rights. We want that in writing. The banker looked to Frank, who nodded. What my wife said. This is her land. I am just here to help her keep it. Papers were drawn up and signed. Nora Easton Foster and Franklin Foster, joint operators of the Easton homestead. It made things official, legal, protected. And more importantly, it made them a team in the eyes of the law. News of their marriage spread through town quickly. Some people were happy for them. Mr. Peterson gave them a generous credit extension as a wedding gift. The blacksmith offered to do metalwork at a discounted rate. Others, though, were less pleased. Cyrus Holt stopped Frank on the street 2 days after the wedding. So you married her. Clever. You get the land and the woman in one move. I married her because I love her, Frank said evenly. The land is hers. I am just helping her keep it. You are a fool if you think that homestead will ever amount to anything. Cyrus looked him over coldly. But I suppose that is your problem now. You will fail together. I guess we will see. Frank did not move, did not show any of the anger Nora knew he must be feeling. If you will excuse me, I have work to get back to. He walked away without another word, and when he told Nora about the encounter later, she could see the tension in his shoulders. Let him talk, she said, working the knots from his back with her hands. We know the truth. That is all that matters. I just hate that people think I married you for the land. Some people will always think the worst, but the people who matter know better." She kissed his shoulder. "I know better. I know you married me because you love me, because you want to build a life together. Everything else is just noise." Frank turned and pulled her into his arms. "How did I get so lucky to find you? I think I am the lucky one." She rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "A month ago, I was alone and losing everything. Now I have you and hope and a real chance at saving my home." "That is all because of you." "Because of us," he corrected. "We do this together, remember, together." Nora was still getting used to that word, to the reality of not being alone anymore, but every day it felt more natural. Every day she relied on Frank a little more, trusted him a little deeper, loved him a little stronger. The summer work was endless but no longer overwhelming. With two of them sharing the load, they made real progress. The new barn was completed, strong and spacious. Frank built sturdy corrals for boarding livestock and put out word in town that they were open for business. Within a week, they had their first customer, a farmer who needed a place to keep his ox while he traveled to Denver for supplies. The egg business grew. Their expanded flock of chickens laid consistently now, and Nora had figured out how to preserve eggs in lime water for the winter months when production would drop. She sold fresh eggs in the summer and fall, and saved the preserved ones for winter sale when prices would be higher. Frank's horse breeding services were slowly taking off. Thunder had already serviced 3 mares, with more lined up. The stud fees were modest but steady income that added up over time. Nora's garden flourished with the summer rain. She had more vegetables than they could eat, so she started preserving them. Frank helped her learn to can properly, and soon her shelves were lined with jars of beans, tomatoes, pickles, and preserves. What they did not need for winter, they sold or traded in town. By late August, they had made enough to pay Mr. Peterson what they owed him, with enough left over to make a payment on their bank note. It was not the full amount due, but the banker accepted it as good faith. "If you can make another payment like this in October, I will be satisfied that you are meeting your obligations," he told them. "You are doing better than I expected, I will admit." "We will make it," Nora said confidently. "We will make all our payments." Outside the bank, Frank swung her around and kissed her right there on Main Street, not caring who saw. "We are going to do this," he said, his grin wide and bright. "We are actually going to save your homestead." "Our homestead," Nora corrected. "It is ours now, Frank, yours and mine." That night, lying in bed together in the cabin that now felt like a home instead of a burden, Nora traced the lines of Frank's face with gentle fingers. They made love slowly, tenderly, learning each other's bodies with the same patience they brought to learning the land. "I never thought I could be this happy," she whispered afterward, her head on his chest. "I never let myself dream this big." "Dream bigger," Frank murmured into her hair. "Dream of children running through that garden. Dream of herds in the pastures and money in the bank and growing old together on this land. Dream of everything, Nora. We have earned it." She closed her eyes and did just that. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, her dreams were full of hope instead of fear. September came with cooler nights and the first hint of autumn color in the aspen trees on the hillside. Frank and Nora worked together to prepare for winter, cutting wood and storing food and making sure the cabin and barn were tight against the coming cold. They had fall visitors too. A couple from town who wanted to board their milk cow for the winter. A traveling merchant who paid to stable his horses overnight. Each bit of income was carefully recorded and saved toward their next payment. And then, in mid-September, Nora realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another week to be sure, then told Frank one evening as they sat together after supper, "I think I might be pregnant," she said quietly. Frank went very still. Then his face split into the widest smile she had ever seen. "Truly, I am not certain yet, but I think so." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "A baby. We are going to have a baby. Are you happy about it?" "Happy." He pulled back to look at her, and she saw tears in his eyes. "Nora, I am thrilled, terrified but thrilled. We are going to be parents." They told no one else yet, wanting to be certain, but the knowledge colored everything. Frank became even more protective, constantly checking that Nora was not working too hard. She rolled her eyes at his fussing but secretly loved it, loved that he cared so much. By early October, there was no doubt. Nora was definitely pregnant, due sometime in late April or early May. They told Mr. Peterson and his wife, who were delighted. They told the preacher when he came through on his monthly circuit. They told the few people in town they considered friends. They did not tell the Holts. Cyrus and Dalton had been notably absent since the barn burning, though Nora sometimes saw Dalton watching her in town with cold, resentful eyes. The sheriff had never found proof of who set the fire, and after a few weeks, he stopped investigating entirely. "I do not trust them," Frank said one evening as they worked together preparing a stew for supper. "They have been too quiet. Men like that do not just give up. Maybe they realized we are not going anywhere. Maybe. Or maybe they are waiting for us to fail in some other way." He chopped carrots with precise, angry movements. "I just wish I knew what they were planning." They found out 2 weeks before their October payment was due. The banker called them into his office with an apologetic expression that made Nora's stomach sink. "I am sorry to tell you this, but there has been a complication with your land note." He pulled out a thick file. "It seems the original loan your father took out has a clause that requires full payment if the property changes hands." "The property did not change hands," Nora said. "I inherited it from my father, and Frank and I are married. There was no sale." "I understand, but marriage technically constitutes a change in ownership according to the terms. The loan holder is invoking the clause and calling the full note due immediately." Frank leaned forward, his voice dangerous. "Who is the loan holder?" The banker hesitated. "The loan was sold last month to a private investor, a Mr. Cyrus Holt." The bottom dropped out of Nora's world. "Cyrus bought our loan. Without telling us, without giving us any warning, he bought our debt and now he is calling it due." Frank's voice was hard as stone. "That is legal." "Unfortunately, yes. The terms of the loan allow it to be sold to another party, and that party has the right to call it due under certain circumstances. Marriage qualifies as one of those circumstances." "How much?" Nora asked, though she already knew the answer would be devastating. $800. "Due in full within 30 days. $800. It might as well have been 8,000. They had managed to save almost 200 toward their regular payment, but that was nowhere near enough. And there was no way they could earn $600 more in 30 days. "We need to speak with Cyrus," Frank said grimly. "There has to be a way to work this out." But when they went to the Holt Ranch the next day, Cyrus was immovable. "The terms are the terms. $800 in 30 days, or I foreclose and take the property." "You should have read the fine print before you got married, Foster." "You planned this," Nora accused. "You burned our barn to try to drive us off, and when that did not work, you bought our loan and manipulated the terms. You wanted us to fail." "I wanted you to see reason," Cyrus corrected coldly. "But you insisted on playing at ranching with your drifter husband. Now you will pay the price for that stubbornness." "We will get the money," Frank said. "We will find a way. You have 30 days. Cyrus's smile was cruel. "After that, the land is mine. And there is not a judge in the county who will side with you over the legal terms of a loan. I have made certain of that." They rode home in silence, both of them numb with shock and rage. $800 in 30 days. It was impossible. But Frank was not ready to give up. "We have some options," he said that night as they went over their finances. "We can sell Thunder. He is a good horse, valuable bloodlines. He might bring in $100, maybe more." "Frank, no. He is your horse. You love him. I love you more. And I love this land. Thunder is just a horse. We can get another horse." But she heard the pain in his voice and knew it was killing him to even consider it. "What else?" she asked. "We can sell the livestock, the chickens, the cows we are boarding, everything. That is another $100, maybe $150. We can sell every bit of preserved food we have been planning to keep for winter, maybe $50 there." He ran his hands through his hair. "We can try to borrow money, but I doubt anyone will lend to us with Cyrus Holt as an enemy." Nora added up the numbers in her head. Even selling everything, they would still be hundreds of dollars short. "It is not enough, I know." Frank's voice was hollow. "Nora, there is one more option. I have been avoiding even thinking about it, but I do not see another way." "What, my sister?" "Mary. She married well. Her husband's blacksmith business is successful. They have money saved. If I write to her, ask for a loan." "Frank, you have not spoken to your sister in years. You said you felt too guilty to face her." "I know, but this is your home, Nora, our home, and our baby's home." His hand moved to rest on her still flat stomach. "I will swallow my pride if it means keeping our family safe." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I cannot ask you to do that." "You are not asking. I am offering." He pulled her close. "Mary is family. Family helps each other. Maybe it is time I learned that lesson again." They sent the letter the next day, explaining the situation and asking for a loan of $500 with interest. They would pay it back over time, as fast as they could. Frank wrote to his sister with shaking hands, apologizing for his long silence and begging for help he did not deserve. Then they did everything else they could. Frank sold Thunder to a rancher for $120, and Nora saw him cry for the first time as he watched his horse being led away. They sold their boarding livestock and most of the chickens, keeping only 6 hens for laying. They sold every jar of preserved food except what they would need to survive the winter. They offered services to anyone who would pay. Frank worked himself to exhaustion doing odd jobs in town. Nora took in mending and laundry despite her pregnancy fatigue. By the end of 3 weeks, they had scraped together $580, still more than 200 short, and they had sold everything they owned. Frank had even tried to sell his saddle, but no one would pay what it was worth. The letter from Mary arrived with 4 days left before the deadline. Nora watched Frank's hands shake as he opened it, saw his face crumble as he read. "She sent it," he said, his voice breaking. "She sent $500. She said it is not a loan, it is a gift. She said she is proud of me for building a life, for finding love, for being strong enough to ask for help. She said she never blamed me and she is sorry I carried that guilt for so long." He sat down hard, the letter clutched in his hands, and sobbed. Nora held him, her own tears flowing freely. They had the money. Between what they had saved and Mary's gift, they had enough to pay off the loan with a little left over. The next morning they walked into the bank and paid Cyrus Holt every penny they owed. The banker drew up the paperwork, marking the loan paid in full. Cyrus's face went purple with rage, but there was nothing he could do. The debt was cleared, the land was legally theirs, free and clear. "This is not over," Cyrus hissed as they left the bank. "Yes, it is," Frank said calmly. "You have no hold on us now. We owe you nothing. The land is ours, and there is nothing you can do about it." They walked out into the bright October sunshine, holding hands, giddy with relief and exhaustion. They had done it. Against all odds, they had saved the homestead. That night, lying in bed, Nora said, "We have nothing left. No money, no animals except 6 chickens, no reserves. Winter is coming and we are starting from nothing." "We have each other," Frank said. "We have this land. We have our health and our baby on the way. We will rebuild, Nora, the same way we did before, one day at a time. And this time, no one can take it from us. I am scared." "So am I," he pulled her close. "But we will face it together. That is what marriage means, what family means. We will get through this." Winter came hard that year. Snow piled high and the temperatures dropped low. But the cabin was tight and warm, and Frank had cut enough wood to see them through. They lived on rabbit and fish and the vegetables they had kept for themselves. It was a lean time, but they managed. Frank spent the winter months planning for spring. He built furniture to sell, carved wooden items that Nora could take to town when the weather allowed. She sewed and mended, building up inventory of household goods to sell. They saved every penny, slowly rebuilding their reserves. The baby grew inside her, and Nora spent long evenings by the fire imagining what their child would look like. Would they have Frank's green eyes? Her dark hair? She felt the first flutters of movement in January and cried with joy when Frank felt the baby kick for the first time in February. Spring came late, but it came. The snow melted and the creek ran high with runoff. Frank planted a bigger garden this year, expanding on Nora's careful work. He bought 2 hens and a rooster with some of their winter earnings, starting to rebuild their flock. In April, Nora went into labor 3 weeks early. Frank rode like mad to fetch the midwife from town, his face white with fear. The labor was long and difficult, and for a few terrifying hours, Frank thought he might lose her, but Nora was strong. She had not survived everything they had been through only to be defeated now. After 18 hours of labor, she delivered a healthy baby boy with her father's dark eyes and Frank's strong features. They named him Daniel Foster, after the father Nora had lost, and in honor of everything they had fought to preserve. He was perfect, tiny and red and screaming with life, and when Frank held his son for the first time, he wept with joy and gratitude and overwhelming love. "We did it," Nora whispered, exhausted but radiant. "We saved the land. We made a family. We did it." "You did it," Frank corrected, kissing her forehead. "You are the strongest person I have ever known, Nora Foster. I am in awe of you." She smiled, her eyes drifting closed. "We did it together. That is what matters." Frank sat beside her bed, holding his son and watching his wife sleep, and he thought about the path that had brought him here. From drifter to husband to father, from a man running from guilt to a man building a future. All because he had stopped at a broken-down homestead one day and seen a woman who needed help. No, he corrected himself. A woman who needed a partner. And somehow, impossibly, he had become that partner. They had saved each other, really. She had given him purpose and love and a reason to stay in one place. He had given her help and support and the knowledge that she did not have to face the world alone. Together, they had built something worth keeping. A home, a family, a life. The years passed in the way they do on working land, each season bringing its own challenges and triumphs. They bought more chickens and started selling eggs again. Frank found another horse, not as fine as Thunder but solid and reliable. They took in livestock for boarding and slowly built up a good reputation in the area. Nora's preserves became famous in Golden. She had a gift for flavor combinations, and people sought out her jams and pickles and canned vegetables. It became a steady income stream that saw them through the lean times. They had another child 2 years later, a daughter they named Mary after Frank's sister. Mary had Nora's dark hair and Frank's green eyes and a stubborn streak a mile wide. She kept them on their toes from the moment she could walk. Frank finally reconciled fully with his sister, traveling to Kansas City to meet her family. It was an emotional reunion, and he came home lighter somehow, the guilt he had carried for so long finally released. Mary and her family visited the homestead the next summer, and Nora loved seeing Frank with his niece and nephew, teaching them to ride and fish and love the land the way he did. When Daniel was 5, they expanded the barn again and bought their first cattle. Just 3 cows to start, but it was a beginning. Frank taught Daniel how to care for them, patient and gentle just like his own father had been. The boy took to ranch work naturally, and Frank would smile watching him, seeing the future of the homestead in his son's eager hands. Cyrus Holt never forgave them for succeeding. He died 3 years after they paid off the loan, bitter and angry to the end. Dalton inherited the ranch, but without his father's business sense, it started to decline. He eventually sold out to a syndicate from Denver and moved east. Nora felt no satisfaction in his failure, just relief that he was gone and could no longer threaten what they had built on their 10th wedding anniversary. Frank surprised Nora with a real wedding ring. It was simple, just a gold band, but she cried when he slipped it on her finger. "I should have given you this on our wedding day," he said, "but we could not afford it then. Now, finally, I can give you the ring you deserve." "I did not marry you for rings," Nora said, kissing him. "I married you for this, for us, for the life we built together." They stood on the porch of their cabin, looking out over land that was truly theirs now. The garden was lush and full. The barn stood strong and proud. The pastures held cattle and horses. Their children played in the yard, healthy and happy and secure. It had not been easy. There had been hard years, lean winters, losses and setbacks and moments when giving up seemed like the only logical choice. But they had persevered. Together, they had taken a failing homestead and turned it into a thriving ranch. They had built a family and a future and a legacy worth passing on. "Do you remember that first day?" Frank asked, his arm around her shoulders. "When I saw you drop that axe and thought you were about to fall over. I remember you wrapping my hands and telling me to rest." Nora leaned into him. "I thought you were crazy, some stranger offering to help for no reason." "I had a reason, I just did not know it yet." He turned her to face him. "I love you, Nora, more today than yesterday, more tomorrow than today. Loving you has been the greatest joy of my life." "I love you too," she said, and kissed him as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Their children grew. Daniel became a skilled rancher, learning everything Frank could teach him. Mary proved to have her mother's head for business, taking over the preserve operation and expanding it until they were selling to stores throughout the territory. When Colorado became a state in 1876, they celebrated by hosting a party for everyone in Golden, showing off the homestead and the life they had built. Frank taught both children to ride, to rope, to work cattle. But he also taught them his mother's healing skills, passing on the knowledge she had given him. He taught them to read tracts and respect the land, to work hard but not work themselves to death. He taught them that asking for help was not weakness but wisdom. Nora taught them to cook and preserve food, to manage money and plan for lean times. She taught them her father's lessons about honest work and honest dealing. She taught them that land was worth fighting for, but family was worth more. She taught them that love and partnership could overcome almost any obstacle. In 1885, when Daniel was 20 and preparing to take over more of the ranch operations, he brought home a young woman named Sarah. She was the daughter of a shopkeeper in town, practical and kind and completely enamored with ranch life. Frank and Nora watched their son fall in love and saw themselves in the young couple's eyes. Daniel and Sarah married that fall, and suddenly, the homestead was home to 3 generations. They built an addition onto the cabin, expanding it into a real house. There was talk of Daniel and Sarah building their own place on the property, but for now, they all lived together in comfortable chaos. Mary married a year later to a young lawyer from Denver who fell in love with her fierce independence and sharp mind. They moved to the city but visited often, and their children spent summers on the ranch learning the land the way their mother had. Frank and Nora became grandparents and then grandparents again. They watched their family grow and thrive on the land they had fought so hard to keep. The homestead became a ranch, became a legacy, passed down through generations who would never fully know how close it had come to being lost. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Frank took Nora back to the spot where he had first wrapped her raw, bleeding hands. The old woodpile was gone now, replaced by a proper woodshed. The cabin had become a house. The struggling garden had become acres of productive land. But the mountains still rose in the distance and the creek still sang its eternal song. "We did good," Frank said quietly. "Your father would be proud." "He would," Nora agreed. "And your mother would be too. We built something worth keeping, Frank, something that will last long after we are gone." He pulled her close, and they stood together in the place where their story had begun. Two people who had been alone and struggling, who had found each other at exactly the right moment. Two people who had chosen to work together, to love together, to build together. "I would do it all again," Frank said. "Every hard day, every setback, every moment of fear and doubt, I would do it all again for this. For you, for us." "So would I," Nora said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. They grew old together on the land they had saved, their hands weathered from years of work, but still strong. They watched their grandchildren grow, and their great-grandchildren be born. They watched Golden grow from a small mountain town to a prosperous city. They watched Colorado change and develop while their ranch stayed constant, a piece of the Old West preserved. Frank died at 73, peacefully in his sleep after a long day's work. Nora found him in the morning and knew immediately that he was gone. She held his hand and cried for the man who had saved her life in more ways than one, who had loved her faithfully for over 40 years, who had been her partner in every sense of the word. She buried him on the hill beside her parents, under an aspen tree that turned gold every fall. The whole town came to the funeral. People told stories about Frank, about his kindness and his steadiness and his skill, about the drifter who had stayed and become a pillar of the community, about the man who had seen a woman in need and stopped to help, changing both their lives forever. Nora lived another 5 years, long enough to see her great-great-grandchildren born. She spent her last years in the house Frank had helped her keep, surrounded by family and love and the land that had been worth every sacrifice. When she died at 75, they buried her beside Frank under the aspen tree. Her tombstone reads simply, "Nora Easton Foster, beloved wife, mother, and homesteader, she never stopped fighting." But the real memorial was the ranch itself, still thriving under Daniel's careful management and destined to pass to his children and grandchildren after him. The land Frank and Nora had saved, the home they had built, the family they had created, that was their legacy. That was their triumph. And on summer evenings, when the light turned golden and the mountains cast long shadows, you could almost see them. A tall man with green eyes and gentle hands, and a strong woman with determination in every line of her body. Walking together through the garden they had planted, checking the fences they had mended, standing on the porch of the cabin they had made a home. Together, always together, in the land they had loved and the life they had built. Two souls who had found each other when they needed it most, and had held on through everything that followed. A cowboy and a homesteader, bound by love and labor and the simple truth that some things were worth fighting for, some things were worth keeping, and they had kept it all. Every promise, every dream, every hard-won acre of the homestead that had become their whole world. They had done it together, and that had made all the difference.